Welcome to The Conversation. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this episode I want to talk about the fatal flaw in the recently released documentary Framing Britney Spears. Last week I finally got around to watching the recently released documentary Framing Britney Spears. Now, I had no personal interest in this documentary at all. The only reason I watched it was because a lot of people were saying to me, look, Brendan, you need to watch this documentary. Britney Spears, the world famous pop star, is effectively being held hostage by her own family. It's really serious. This matters. You've got to watch it. And so I thought to myself, well, I better watch this because it sounds pretty serious. So I watched the documentary, but I was kind of surprised by the end of it how little there was to actually back up the very serious allegations that this documentary is trying to make about Britney Spears, her current situation, and the treatment that she's receiving at the hands of her family, and in particular at the hands of her father. Now, for those who don't know anything about Framing Britney Spears, basically this is a documentary about the fact that she is under a conservatorship. Now, a conservatorship is like a legal guardianship. Some countries might call it a power of attorney, where someone else, in this case her father, has the legal control of her affairs, and this has been issued in order to protect her well-being. It's something that's normally applied to vulnerable people. Now, this is something that's been going on for many years, and the whole crux of this documentary is really trying to claim that her father is using this instrument, this legal instrument, in a nefarious way for his own personal gain, and Britney Spears is effectively a prisoner in this arrangement. Now, that's a very serious allegation, and really I think ultimately this is the great ironic flaw in this documentary, because this doco starts, and this is where the strength of this documentary really is actually the beginning section, and it explores the way in which Britney Spears was very much targeted early on in her life by tabloid journalism, by salacious sort of tabloid gossip, rumour mongering, and lots of judgments were made about her as a person. And that's really quite an important part of this documentary, I think. And it's a really important issue. The way in which she, as a person, her very personhood, was effectively commodified by all sorts of people and for all sorts of reasons. And she really loses her way in the midst of that. And on top of that, there are all these sort of public speculations based on rumour and salacious gossip about her. And she starts to unravel. And it seems pretty clear that she had some form of mental health crisis as a result of all of this that was sort of piled on top of her. And that's totally understandable. The human person is not made to be a commodity. We are not made to be an object in someone else's game. We are made for self-giving love. We are made to receive self-giving love from others, and also to give of ourselves in self-giving love, and we flourish under those conditions. But when you've been reduced to an object and you're caught up in this massive global cult of celebrity and you've been objectified to that degree, it's very hard to satisfy either of those two basic human requirements. People don't tend to actually receive us as gift and treat us with self-giving love. They tend to use us in that situation as an object for their own ends. And it's very hard to form meaningful friendships with other people where you can give of yourself in meaningful self-giving love as well, because there's this like massive power imbalance. You're the major global celebrity, and they are reacting or interacting with you in that sort of way. So it does a serious harm, or it creates a serious imposition on any relationship or friendship that you might try and form with other people. It's a very challenging situation that someone would probably find themselves in, and the scope of which Britney Spears was really under the microscope must have just added and amplified that to sort of the nth degree. Now, here's the irony though. This documentary that quite rightly starts out by pointing the damage that is done to people, in this case Britney Spears, with this sort of rumour mongering and gossip and this sort of salacious sort of speculation about what was really going on, and almost this glee and delight that people were taking in her dysfunction and in her sort of public breaking down. That same thing is actually being done by this documentary to her father now. Her father is effectively put under this sort of tabloid-like, salacious, rumour-mongering speculation by this very documentary. They are accusing him of something very, very serious and nefarious. They are making a very, very serious judgment about this man, and his motivations. And when you think about it, what is actually being alleged here is actually really, really serious, because it's not just the father who's under the gun here with the way in which this documentary is framed. It's also really the judge who issued the original conservatorship. And so effectively the suggestion is that he's done this without good grounds for doing so, when in actual fact, as the documentary even states, no one knows what's in that legal document. It is rightly sealed and protected because we don't really have the right to pry into Britney Spears and her personal private struggles and tragedies and sort of turn them into tabloid fodder. And so the courts have rightly sort of sealed that document as a form of protection. That's what I'm assuming anyway. I'm going to be charitable and assume the best here. But this documentary is all but suggesting that her father, and obviously implicitly the judge, is also in on this, and the legal system is keeping this thing going for some reason. But why? What would be the motivation of doing that? Now, the documentary basically alleges that there is some sort of financial gain to be made here by her father. Now, this is a point that I think actually where the documentary is good, but it doesn't really unpack and explore in a major way. But there is a question here that I think does matter, and I'll come to that in just a minute. But if I heard correctly in this documentary, at one point they refer to the fact that this conservatorship results in a situation where he receives a mere 1% of Britney Spears' income. Now, to put that into perspective, this is someone, I think it was in 2019, she earned about $34 million. And so when you put that into perspective and you realize he's probably receiving about $330,000 odd dollars of that money. Now, in the grand scheme of human affairs, that's obviously not an insignificant sum, and for most people, they would probably happily receive an income of $330,000 a year. They would not turn their noses up at that at all. However, when you put it in the context of her total earnings, that's impressive because of the amount that she earns, but in the context of her total earnings, that means that she's still keeping tens of millions of dollars compared to his $300,000. He's receiving only 1%. Now, I'm assuming I heard that bit correctly, because maybe I didn't quite get that right, and if you want to, correct me in the comments section, but if that's the case, that's the case. However, despite the fact that it's only 1%, I think there's still an interesting question here, and I don't think the documentary really did enough to unpack and explore this question. I would expect to hear from more experts, legal experts, about this type of arrangement, whether it's usual to have a situation where the person who is overseeing the legal guardianship is actually financially benefiting from it. Is it possible that the reason this arrangement exists is because the judge looked at the situation and said, well, in this case, in order to step up and actually protect his daughter, her father, Britney Spears' father, actually has to take on the role of being her manager, and actually administrating her affairs, and that's a full-time job, and therefore he should be paid appropriately. And I don't know, in the scheme of things, is $300,000 a year a salary that is disproportionate in that industry? I'm not sure. Is that the reasoning? Are there other situations where you maybe have husbands and wives? I remember my own father in the final years of his life. My mother had to take over control of the financial affairs of our household because my father's faculties were starting to go. And in that situation, she's obviously a financial recipient and is involved and gains from that relationship. But the court rightly looks at it and says, well, this is just par for the course because they're married, they're husband and wife, and financial affairs are joined and all that kind of stuff. So I would like to hear from more, or I would have liked to have heard more in this documentary from more legal experts talking about whether this is unusual or not, because to me it did raise a question. Should someone be gaining financially from a situation where they are in a position of legal guardianship? Because it seems to me, at least on the surface, that does create a bit of a conflict of interest and a question about whether or not that person would always act in the best interests of the person that they are legally accountable for, or whether they would act actually in accordance with their own financial best interests because there's money at stake for them personally. However, there is a second issue as well here, which the documentary only very briefly touches on and then quickly moves on from. And I think this was a fascinating point that was raised at one point in the doco, and that was this. Why is it you can have a situation where you have an adult woman who is under a legal guardianship protection arrangement where her affairs are being looked over and managed by others, Yet at the same time, she is also engaged in a global enterprise, an entertainment enterprise. She is a celebrity on the global stage and producing music and touring and everything else. This is a massive endeavor. And so it sort of seems to me, if I go back to the case of my own father, and I remember my father, and the reason that he had that financial guardianship, if you like, placed over him was because he had become vulnerable. He wasn't still at work. He wasn't out and about doing all those other things and had a financial guardianship over him. So to me, it kind of raises a question about at what point is a person vulnerable, or if they are that vulnerable that they require financial guardianship, should they also be out and about engaged in this massive global commercial and as I said, tens of millions of dollars that it's earning every single year, entertainment enterprise? Do those two things go together? Should there be a more serious review of the legal guardianship as a result of the fact of what she's actually doing on a day-to-day basis and seems to be quite competent at doing as well? However, at the end of the day, when all is said and told, one of the things that I think has most surprised me about this doco has been the reaction. And that has been the number of people, from celebrities to ordinary Joe blogs in the street, who have come out as the staunchest defenders of this particular cause and are running around claiming that Britney Spears is a prisoner of her own father and there's this great injustice going on right under our noses and it needs to be addressed. Now, I'm kind of surprised by that, because these people who have suddenly and very, very quickly out of nowhere become the biggest, or loudest certainly, advocates of this cause, it seems to me that this is still all based on some very, very tenuous speculation, gossip, and rumour mongering and assumptions about what is actually going on here. Now, I'm not saying there's not a case to answer, but what I'm saying is that I think we need to be a lot more cautious before we rush off and embrace things like this and start making very serious claims about Britney Spears and her father in particular, because they're very serious allegations that you're making against this person, without actually being sure that they really are true and that this isn't doing exactly what the documentary at the very beginning highlights, and rightly so, as a problem. The way in which we gossip about, the way in which we treat unverified and salacious information, and the way in which we receive that and then use that to pass all sorts of judgments on people in the public eye that just aren't fair and that are lacking in all charity. Thanks for watching this episode of The Conversation. Don't forget to like, share, and give this video a thumbs up. That all helps the channel. And wherever you're watching, please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to hit the little notifications bell as well. That way you'll get updated about every new piece of content that we publish. A huge thank you to everyone who is supporting us at patreon.com/leftfootmedia. For as little as $1 a month, you can help to ensure that this great content keeps happening. So that's patreon.com/leftfootmedia. As little as $1 a month, or as much as you'd like to contribute. And a huge thank you, as I said, to everyone who made today's episode possible. You guys are awesome. I'll see you next time on The Conversation.